What's up, folks? I'm Dan, and welcome to I've Been Meaning to Read That, the show where I read books out loud that I've been meaning to read. Let's go. This morning, I woke up, and the temperature outside was 47 degrees. And let me just say that that's amazing. I am so excited. That means fall is in the air. Last week, it was like in the 90s with 90% humidity. Every time I got in my car at the end of the workday, I immediately just became drenched in sweat, and it was miserable. I sleep on the top floor of my house, and it gets toasty up there. And the only other solution is to go bankrupt from AC or sleep in the basement. And you know me, I'm not going to do that. So I've just been miserable with the heat. And now there's a crisp little chill in the air. And the Buckeyes are about to start playing again on Saturdays. And it's going to be pumpkin spice season. I can wear my flannels and my sweatshirts and my sweatpants again. You guys, things are looking up. Things are really, really starting to look up. Now, the other amazing thing about fall is that nothing feels better than on a nice, crisp fall afternoon than to curl up with a good book, like, I don't know, The Count of Monte Cristo. And I don't know about you, but these last few chapters have been intense, exceptionally intense. Morcerf is finally finding out that the Count of Monte Cristo is behind the ruin of his father's name. Let's find out what happens next. Chapter 88, The Insult. At the banker's door, Beauchamp stopped Morcerf. "Listen," said he. "Just now I told you it was of Monsieur de Monte Cristo you must demand an explanation."
"Yes, and we are going to his house."
"Reflect, Morcerf, one moment before you go."
"On what shall I reflect?"
"On the importance of the step you are taking."
"Is it more serious than going to Monsieur Danglars?"
"Yes. Danglars is a money lover, and those who love money, you know, think too much of what they risk to be easily induced to fight a duel. The other is, on the contrary, to all appearance, a true nobleman. But do you not fear to find him a bully?"
"I only fear one thing, namely, to find a man who will not fight."
"Do not be alarmed," said Beauchamp. "He will meet you. My only fear is that he will be too strong for you."
"My friend,"
said Morcerf with a sweet smile,
"that is what I wish. The happiest thing that could occur to me would be to die in my father's stead. That would save us all."
"Your mother, she would die of grief."
"My poor mother,"
said Albert, passing his hand across his eyes.
"I know she would, but better so than die of shame."
"Are you quite decided, Albert?"
"Yes, let us go."
"But do you think we shall find the Count at home?"
"He intended returning some hours after me, and doubtless he is now at home."
They ordered the driver to take them to number 30 Champs-Élysées. Beauchamp wished to go in alone, but Albert observed that as this was an unusual circumstance, he might be allowed to deviate from the usual etiquette of duels. The cause which the young man espoused was one so sacred that Beauchamp had only to comply with all his wishes. He yielded and contented himself with following Morcerf. Albert sprang from the porter's lodge to the steps. He was received by Baptistine. The Count had indeed just arrived, but he was in his bath and had forbidden that anyone should be admitted.
"But after his bath?"
asked Morcerf. "My master will go to dinner."
"And after dinner?"
"He will sleep an hour."
"Then?"
"He is going to the opera."
"Are you sure of it?"
asked Albert. "Quite, sir. My master has ordered his horses at 8 o'clock precisely."
"Very good,"
replied Albert.
"That is all I wish to know."
Then, turning towards Beauchamp,
"If you have anything to attend to, Beauchamp, do it directly. If you have any appointment for this evening, defer it till tomorrow. I depend on you to accompany me to the opera, and if you can, bring Chateau Renaud with you."
Beauchamp availed himself of Albert's permission and left him, promising to call for him at 8:15. On his return home, Albert expressed his wish to Franz Debray and Morel to see them at the opera that evening. Then he went to see his mother, who, since the events of the day before, had refused to see anyone, and had kept her room. He found her in bed, overwhelmed with grief at this public humiliation. The sight of Albert produced the effect which might naturally be expected on Mercedes. She pressed her son's hand and sobbed aloud, but her tears relieved her. Albert stood one moment speechless by the side of his mother's bed. It was evident from his pale face and knit brows that his resolution to revenge himself was growing weaker.
"My dear mother," said he, "do you know if Monsieur de Morcerf has any enemy?"
Mercedes started. She noticed that the young man did not say, "My father." "My son," she said, "persons in the Count's situation have many secret enemies. Those who are known are not the most dangerous."
"I know it, and appeal to your penetration. You are of so superior a mind, nothing escapes you."
"Why do you say so?"
"Because, for instance, you noticed on the evening of the ball we gave that Monsieur de Monte Cristo would eat nothing in our house."
Mercedes raised herself on her feverish arm. "Monsieur de Monte Cristo?" she exclaimed. "And how is he connected with the question you asked me?"
"You know, mother, Monsieur de Monte Cristo is almost an Oriental, and it is customary with the Orientals to secure full liberty for revenge by not eating or drinking in the houses of their enemies."
"Do you say Monsieur de Monte Cristo is our enemy?" replied Mercedes, becoming paler than the sheet which covered her. "Who told you so? Why, you're mad, Albert. Monsieur de Monte Cristo has only shown us kindness. Monsieur de Monte Cristo saved your life. You yourself presented him to us. Oh, I entreat you, my son, if you had entertained such an idea, dispel it, and my counsel to you, nay, my prayer, is to retain his friendship."
"Mother," replied the young man, "you have special reasons for telling me to conciliate that man."
"I?" said Mercedes, blushing as rapidly as she had turned pale, and again becoming paler than ever.
"Yes, doubtless. And is it not that he may never do us any harm?"
Mercedes shuddered, and, fixing on her son a scrutinizing gaze, "You speak strangely," said she to Albert, "and you appear to have some singular prejudices. What has the Count done? 3 days since you were with him in Normandy. Only 3 days since we looked on him as our best friend." An ironical smile passed over Albert's lips. Mercedes saw it, and, with the double instinct of woman and mother, guessed all. But, as she was prudent and strong-minded, she concealed both her sorrows and her fears. Albert was silent. An instant after, the Countess resumed. "You came to inquire after my health. I will candidly acknowledge that I am not well. You should install yourself here, and cheer my solitude. I do not wish to be left alone."
"Mother," said the young man, "you know how gladly I would obey your wish, but an urgent and important affair obliges me to leave you for the whole evening."
"Well," replied Mercedes, sighing, "go, Albert. I will not make you a slave to your filial piety." Albert pretended he did not hear. He bowed to his mother and quitted her. Scarcely had he shut her door when Mercedes called a confidential servant and ordered him to follow Albert wherever he should go that evening, and to come and tell her immediately what he observed. Then she rang for her lady's maid, and, weak as she was, she dressed in order to be ready for whatever might happen. The footman's mission was an easy one. Albert went to his room and dressed with unusual care. At 10 minutes to 8, Beauchamp arrived. He had seen Chateau Renaud, who had promised to be in the orchestra before the curtain was raised. Both got into Albert's coupe, and, as the young man had no reason to conceal where he was going, he called aloud, "To the opera!" In his impatience, he arrived before the beginning of the performance. Chateau Renaud was at his post. Apprised by Beauchamp of the circumstances, he required no explanation from Albert. The conduct of the son in seeking to avenge his father was so natural that Chateau Renaud did not seek to dissuade him, and was content with renewing his assurances of devotion. Debray was not yet come, but Albert knew that he seldom lost a scene at the opera. Albert wandered about the theater until the curtain was drawn up. He hoped to meet with Monsieur de Monte Cristo either in the lobby or on the stairs. The bell summoned him to his seat, and he entered the orchestra with Chateau Renaud and Beauchamp. but his eyes scarcely quitted the box between the columns, which remained obstinately closed during the whole of the first act. At last, as Albert was looking at his watch for about the 100th time, at the beginning of the second act, the door opened, and Monte Cristo entered, dressed in black, and, leaning over the front of the box, looked round the pit. Morrel followed him, and looked also for his sister and brother-in-law. He soon discovered them in another box, and kissed his hand to them. The Count, in his survey of the pit, encountered a pale face and threatening eyes, which evidently sought to gain his attention. He recognized Albert, but thought it better not to notice him, as he looked so angry and discomposed. Without communicating his thoughts to his companion, he sat down, drew out his opera-glass, and looked another way. Although apparently not noticing Albert, he did not, however, lose sight of him, and when the curtain fell at the end of the second act, he saw him leave the orchestra with his two friends. Then his head was seen passing at the back of the boxes, and the Count knew that the approaching storm was intended to fall on him. He was at the moment conversing cheerfully with Morrel, but he was well prepared for what might happen. The door opened, and Monte Cristo, turning round, saw Albert, pale and trembling, followed by Beauchamp and Chateau Renaud. "Well," cried he, with that benevolent politeness which distinguished his salutation from the common civilities of the world, "my cavalier has attained his object. Good evening, Monsieur de Morcerf." The countenance of this man, who possessed such extraordinary control over his feelings, expressed the most perfect cordiality. Morrel only then recollected the letter he had received from the Viscount, in which, without assigning any reason, he begged him to go to the opera, but he understood that something terrible was brooding.
"We are not come here, sir, to exchange hypocritical expressions of politeness or false professions of friendship," said Albert, "but to demand an explanation."
The young man's trembling voice was scarcely audible. "An explanation? At the opera?" said the Count, with that calm tone and penetrating eye which characterized the man who knows his cause is good. "Little acquainted as I am with the habits of Parisians, I should not have thought this was the place for such a demand."
"Still, if people will shut themselves up," said Albert, "and cannot be seen because they are bathing, dining, or asleep, we must avail ourselves of the opportunity whenever they are to be seen."
"I am not difficult of access, sir, for yesterday, if my memory does not deceive me, you were at my house."
"Yesterday I was at your house, sir," said the young man, "because then I knew not who you were."
In pronouncing these words, Albert had raised his voice so as to be heard by those in the adjoining boxes and in the lobby. Thus the attention of many was attracted by this altercation. "Where are you come from, sir?" said Monte Cristo. "You do not appear to be in the possession of your senses."
"Provided I understand your perfidy, sir, and succeed in making you understand that I will be revenged, I shall be reasonable enough," said Albert furiously. "I do not understand you, sir," replied Monte Cristo. "And if I did, your tone is too high. I am at home here, and I alone have a right to raise my voice above another's. Leave the box, sir." Monte Cristo pointed towards the door with the most commanding dignity. "Ah, I shall know how to make you leave your home,"
replied Albert, clasping in his convulsed grasp the glove, which Monte Cristo did not lose sight of. "Well, well," said Monte Cristo quietly, "I see you wish to quarrel with me, but I would give you one piece of advice, which you will do well to keep in mind. It's in poor taste to make a display of a challenge. Display is not becoming to everyone, Monsieur de Morcerf." At this name, a murmur of astonishment passed around the group of spectators of this scene. They had talked of no one but Morcerf the whole day. Albert understood the allusion in a moment, and was about to throw his glove at the Count, when Morrel seized his hand, while Beauchamp and Chateau Renaud, fearing the scene would surpass the limits of a challenge, held him back. But Monte Cristo, without rising and leaning forward in his chair, merely stretched out his arm and, taking the damp, crushed glove from the clenched hand of the young man, "Sir," said he in a solemn tone, "I consider your glove thrown, and will return it to you wrapped around a bullet. Now, leave me, or I will summon my servants to throw you out at that door." Wild, almost unconscious, and with eyes inflamed, Albert stepped back, and Morrel closed the door. Monte Cristo took up his glass again as if nothing had happened. His face was like marble, and his heart bronze. Morel whispered.
What have you done to him?
I? Nothing, at least personally, said Monte Cristo.
But there must be some cause for this strange scene.
The Count of Morcerf's adventure exasperates the young man.
Have you anything to do with it?
It was through Haydée that the chamber was informed of his father's treason.
Indeed, said Morel. I have been told, but would not credit it, that the Grecian slave I have seen you with here in this very box was the daughter of Ali Pasha.
It's true, nevertheless.
Then, said Morel, I understand it all, and this scene was premeditated.
How so?
Yes, Albert wrote to request me to come to the opera, doubtless that I might be a witness to the insult he meant to offer you.
Probably, said Monte Cristo with his imperturbable tranquility.
But what shall you do with him?
With whom?
With Albert.
What shall I do with Albert? As certainly, Maximilian, as I now press your hand, I shall kill him before 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Morel, in his turn, took Monte Cristo's hand in both of his, and he shuddered to feel how cold and steady it was.
Ah, Count, said he, his father loves him so much.
Do not speak to me of that, said Monte Cristo, with the first movement of anger he had betrayed. I will make him suffer. Morel, amazed, let fall Monte Cristo's hand.
Count, said he.
Dear Maximilian, interrupted the Count, listen how adorably Dupré is singing that line. Oh, Matilda, idole de mon ami. I was the first to discover Dupré at Naples, and the first to applaud him. Bravo! Bravo! Morel saw it was useless to say more, and refrained. The curtain, which had risen at the close of the scene with Albert, again fell, and a rap was heard at the door. Come in, said Monte Cristo, with a voice that betrayed not the least emotion, and immediately Beauchamp appeared. Good evening, Monsieur Beauchamp, said Monte Cristo, as if this was the first time he had seen the journalist that evening. Be seated. Beauchamp bowed, and, sitting down, Sir, said he, I just now accompanied Monsieur de Morcerf, as you saw. And that means, replied Monte Cristo, laughing, that you had probably just dined together. I'm happy to see, Monsieur Beauchamp, that you are more sober than he was. Sir, said Monsieur Beauchamp, Albert was wrong, I acknowledge, to betray so much anger, and I come on my own account to apologize for him. And having done so, entirely on my own account, be it understood, I would add that I believe you too gentlemanly to refuse giving him some explanation concerning your connection with Yanina. Then I will add 2 words about the young Greek girl. Monte Cristo motioned him to be silent. Come, said he, laughing. There are all my hopes about to be destroyed. How so? Asked Beauchamp. Doubtless you wish to make me appear a very eccentric character. I am, in your opinion, a Lara, a Manfred, a Lord Ruthven. Then, just as I am arriving at the climax, you defeat your own end and seek to make an ordinary man of me. You bring me down to your own level and demand explanations. Indeed, Beauchamp, it's quite laughable. Yet, replied Beauchamp haughtily, there are occasions when probity commands. Monsieur Beauchamp, interposed this strange man, the Count of Monte Cristo bows to none but the Count of Monte Cristo himself. Say no more, I entreat you. I do what I please, Monsieur Beauchamp, and it is always well done. Sir, replied the young man, honest men are not to be paid with such coin. I require honorable guarantees. I am, sir, a living guarantee, replied Monte Cristo, motionless, but with a threatening look. We have both blood in our veins which we wish to shed. That is our mutual guarantee. Tell the Viscount so, and that tomorrow before 10 I shall see what color his is. Then I have only to make arrangements for the duel, said Beauchamp. It's quite immaterial to me, said Monte Cristo, and it was very unnecessary to disturb me at the opera for such a trifle. In France, people fight with the sword or pistol, in the colonies with the carbine, in Arabia with the dagger. Tell your client that, although I am the insulted party, in order to carry out my eccentricity, I leave him the choice of arms, and will accept without discussion, without dispute, anything, even combat by drawing lots, which is always stupid, but with me different from other people, as I am sure to gain. Sure to gain? Repeated Beauchamp, looking with amazement at the Count. Certainly, said Monte Cristo, slightly shrugging his shoulders. Otherwise I would not fight with Monsieur de Morcerf. I shall kill him. I cannot help it. Only, by a single line this evening at my house, let me know the arms and the hour. I do not like to be kept waiting. Pistols, then, at 8 o'clock, in the Bois de Vincennes, said Beauchamp, quite disconcerted, not knowing if he was dealing with an arrogant braggadocio or a supernatural being. Very well, sir, said Monte Cristo. Now all that is settled, do let me see the performance, and tell your friend Albert not to come any more this evening. He will hurt himself with all his ill-chosen barbarisms. Let him go home and go to sleep. Beauchamp left the box perfectly amazed. Now, said Monte Cristo, turning towards Morrel, I may depend upon you, may I not? Certainly, said Morrel. I am at your service, Count. Still, what? It is desirable I should know the real cause. That is to say, you would rather not? No. The young man himself is acting blindfolded, and knows not the true cause, which is known only to God and to me. But I give you my word, Morrel, that God, who does know it, will be on our side. Enough, said Morrel. Who is your second witness? I know no one in Paris, Morrel, on whom I could confer that honor besides you and your brother Emmanuel. Do you think Emmanuel would oblige me? I will answer for him, Count. Well, that's all I require. Tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock you will be with me, will you not? We will. Hush, the curtain is rising. Listen, I never lose a note of this opera if I can avoid it. The music of William Tell is so sweet. End of chapter 88. Chapter 89. The Night. Monte Cristo waited, according to his usual custom, until Dupré had sung his famous Suivez-moi. Then he rose and went out. Morrel took leave of him at the door, renewing his promise to be with him the next morning at 7 o'clock, and to bring Emmanuel. Then he stepped into his coupe, calm and smiling, and was at home in 5 minutes. No one who knew the Count could mistake his expression when, on entering, he said, Ali, bring me my pistols with the ivory cross. Ali brought the box to his master, who examined the weapons with a solicitude very natural to a man who is about to entrust his life to a little powder and shot. These were pistols of an especial pattern, which Monte Cristo had had made for target practice in his own room. A cap was sufficient to drive out the bullet, and from the adjoining room no one would have suspected that the Count was, as sportsmen would say, keeping his hand in. He was just taking one up and looking for the point to aim at on a little iron plate which served him as a target, when his study door opened and Baptistine entered. Before he had spoken a word, the Count saw in the next room a veiled woman, who had followed closely after Baptistine, and now, seeing the Count with a pistol in his hand and swords on the table, rushed in. Baptistine looked at his master, who made a sign to him, and he went out, closing the door after him. "Who are you, madam?" said the Count to the veiled woman. The stranger cast one look around her, to be certain that they were quite alone. Then, bending as if she would have knelt, and joining her hands, she said with an accent of despair, "Edmund, you will not kill my son." The Count retreated a step, uttered a slight exclamation, and let fall the pistol he held. "What name did you pronounce then, Madame de Morcerf?" said he. "Yours," cried she, throwing back her veil. "Yours, which I alone, perhaps, have not forgotten. Edmund, it is not Madame de Morcerf who has come to you. It is Mercédès." "Mercédès is dead, madam," said Monte Cristo. "I know no one now of that name." "Mercédès lives, sir, and she remembers, for she alone recognized you when she saw you, and even before she saw you, by your voice, Edmund, by the simple sound of your voice, and from that moment she has followed your steps, watched you, feared you, and she needs not to inquire what hand has dealt the blow which now strikes Monsieur de Morcerf." "Fernand, do you mean?" replied Monte Cristo with bitter irony. "Since we are recalling names, let us remember them all." Monte Cristo had pronounced the name of Fernand with such an expression of hatred that Mercédès felt a thrill of horror run through every vein. You see, Edmund, I am not mistaken, and have cause to say, spare my son.
And who told you, madame, that I have any hostile intentions against your son?
No one, in truth, but a mother has twofold sight. I guessed all. I followed him this evening to the opera, and concealed in a parquet box, have seen all.
If you have seen all, madam, you know that the son of Fernand has publicly insulted me, said Monte Cristo with awful calmness.
Oh, for pity's sake!
You have seen that he would have thrown his glove in my face if Morel, one of my friends, had not stopped him.
Listen to me. My son has also guessed who you are. He attributes his father's misfortunes to you.
Madam, you are mistaken. They're not misfortunes. It is a punishment. It is not I who strike Monsieur de Morcerf. It is Providence which punishes him.
And why do you represent Providence? Cried Mercedes. Why do you remember when it forgets? What are Yanina and its vizier to you, Edmund? What injury has Fernand Mondego done you in betraying Ali Tepelini?
Ah, madame, replied Monte Cristo, all this is an affair between the French captain and the daughter of Vasiliki. It does not concern me, you're right. And if I have sworn to revenge myself, it is not on the French captain or the Count of Morcerf, but on the fisherman Fernand, the husband of Mercedes, the Catalan.
Ah, sir, cried the Countess, how terrible a vengeance for a fault which fatality made me commit! For I am the only culprit, Edmund, and if you owe revenge to anyone, it is to me, who had not fortitude to bear your absence and my solitude.
But, exclaimed Monte Cristo, why was I absent? And why were you alone?
Because you had been arrested, Edmund, and were a prisoner.
And why was I arrested? Why was I a prisoner?
I do not know, said Mercedes.
You do not, madam, at least I hope not. But I will tell you. I was arrested and became a prisoner because, under the arbor of La Reserve, the day before I was to marry you, a man named Danglars wrote this letter, which the fisherman Fernand himself posted. Monte Cristo went to a secretaire, opened a drawer by a spring, from which he took a paper which had lost its original color, and the ink of which had become a rusty hue. This he placed in the hands of Mercedes. It was Danglars' letter to the king's attorney, which the Count of Monte Cristo, disguised as a clerk from the house of Thomson and French, had taken from the file against Edmond Dantès on the day he had paid the 200,000 francs to Monsieur de Beauville. Mercedes read with terror the following lines. The king's attorney is informed by a friend to the throne and religion that one Edmond Dantès, second in command on board the Pharaon, this day arrived from Smyrna, after having touched at Naples and Porto Ferrajo, is the bearer of a letter from Marat to the usurper, and of another letter from the usurper to the Bonapartist Club in Paris. Ample corroboration of this statement may be obtained by arresting the above-mentioned Edmond Dantès, who either carries the letter for Paris about with him, or has it at his father's abode. Should it not be found in possession of either father or son, then it will be assuredly discovered in the cabin belonging to the said Dantès on board the Pharaon.
How dreadful, said Mercedes, passing her hand across her brow, moist with perspiration. And that letter?
I bought it for 200,000 francs, madame, said Monte Cristo, but that is a trifle, since it enables me to justify myself to you.
And the result of that letter?
You well know, madame, was my arrest, but you do not know how long that arrest lasted. You do not know that I remained for 14 years within a quarter of a league of you, in a dungeon in the Château d'If. You do not know that every day of those 14 years I renewed the vow of vengeance which I made the first day, and yet I was not aware that you had married Fernand, my calumniator, and that my father had died of hunger.
Can it be? Cried Mercedes, shuddering.
That is what I heard on leaving my prison 14 years after I had entered it. And that is why, on account of the living Mercedes and my deceased father, I have sworn to revenge myself on Fernand. And I have revenged myself.
And you are sure the unhappy Fernand did that?
I am satisfied, madame, that he did what I have told you. Besides, that is not much more odious than that a Frenchman by adoption should pass over to the English, that a Spaniard by birth should have fought against the Spaniards, that a stipendiary of Ali should have betrayed and murdered Ali. Compared with such things, what is the letter you have just read? A lover's deception, which the woman who has married that man ought certainly to forgive, but not so the lover who is to have married her. Well,
The French did not avenge themselves on the traitor. The Spaniards did not shoot the traitor. Ali and his tomb left the traitor unpunished, but I, betrayed, sacrificed, buried, have risen from my tomb by the grace of God to punish that man. He sends me for that purpose, and here I am." The poor woman's head and arms fell. Her legs bent under her, and she fell on her knees. "Forgive, Edmund, forgive for my sake, who love you still." The dignity of the wife checked the fervor of the lover and the mother. Her forehead almost touched the carpet when the Count sprang forward and raised her. Then, seated on a chair, she looked at the manly countenance of Monte Cristo, on which grief and hatred still impressed a threatening expression. "Not crush that accursed race?" murmured he. "Abandon my purpose at the moment of its accomplishment? Impossible, madam, impossible." "Edmund," said the poor mother, who tried every means, "when I call you Edmund, why do you not call me Mercedes?" "Mercedes," repeated Monte Cristo. "Mercedes? Well, yes, you're right. That name has still its charms, and this is the first time for a long period that I have pronounced it so distinctly. Oh, Mercedes, I have uttered your name with the sigh of melancholy, with the groan of sorrow, with the last effort of despair. I have uttered it when frozen with cold, crouched on the straw in my dungeon. I have uttered it, consumed with heat, rolling on the stone floor of my prison. Mercedes, I must revenge myself, for I have suffered 14 years. 14 years I wept, I cursed. Now I tell you, Mercedes, I must revenge myself." The Count, fearing to yield to the entreaties of her he had so ardently loved, called his sufferings to the assistance of his hatred. "Revenge yourself, then, Edmund," cried the poor mother, "but let your vengeance fall on the culprits, on him, on me, but not on my son." "It is written in the good book," said Monte Cristo, "that the sins of the fathers shall fall upon their children to the 3rd and 4th generation. Since God himself dictated those words to his prophet, why should I seek to make myself better than God?" "Edmund," continued Mercedes, with her arms extended towards the Count, "since I first knew you, I have adored your name, have respected your memory. Edmund, my friend, do not compel me to tarnish that noble and pure image reflected incessantly on the mirror of my heart. Edmund, if you knew all the prayers I have addressed to God for you while I thought you were living, and since I have thought you must be dead, yes, dead. Alas, I imagined your dead body buried at the foot of some gloomy tower, or cast to the bottom of a pit by hateful jailers, and I wept. What could I do for you, Edmund, besides pray and weep? Listen. For 10 years I dreamed each night the same dream. I had been told that you had endeavored to escape, that you had taken the place of another prisoner, that you had slipped into the winding sheet of a dead body, that you had been thrown alive from the top of the Chateau d'If, and that the cry you uttered as you dashed upon the rocks first revealed to your jailers that they were your murderers. Well, Edmund, I swear to you, by the head of that son for whom I entreat your pity, Edmund, for 10 years I saw every night every detail of that frightful tragedy, and for 10 years I heard every night the cry which awoke me shuddering and cold. And I, too, Edmund, believe me, guilty as I was, oh yes, I, too, have suffered much." "Have you known what it is to have your father starve to death in your absence?" cried Monte Cristo, thrusting his hands into his hair. "Have you seen the woman you loved giving her hand to your rival while you were perishing at the bottom of a dungeon?" "No," interrupted Mercedes, "but I have seen him whom I loved on the point of murdering my son." Mercedes uttered these words with such deep anguish, with an accent of such intense despair, that Monte Cristo could not restrain a sob. The lion was daunted, the avenger conquered. "What do you ask of me?" said he. "Your son's life? Well, he shall live." Mercedes uttered a cry which made the tears start from Monte Cristo's eyes. But these tears disappeared almost instantaneously, for, doubtless, God had sent some angel to collect them. Far more precious were they in his eyes than the richest pearls of Guzerat and Ophir. "Oh," said she, seizing the Count's hand and raising it to her lips. Thank you, Edmund. Now, you are exactly what I dreamt you were. The man I always loved. Now I may say so." "So much the better," replied Monte Cristo. is that poor Edmund will not have long to be loved by you. Death is about to return to the tomb, the phantom to retire in darkness. What do you say, Edmund? I say, since you command me, Mercedes, I must die. Die? And why so? Who talks of dying? Whence have you these ideas of death? You do not suppose that, publicly outraged in the face of a whole theater, in the presence of your friends and those of your son, challenged by a boy who will glory in my forgiveness as if it were a victory, you do not suppose that I can for one moment wish to live. What I most loved after you, Mercedes, was myself, my dignity, and that strength which rendered me superior to other men. That strength was my life. With one word you have crushed it, and I die. But the duel will not take place, Edmund, since you forgive? It will take place, said Monte Cristo in a most solemn tone. But instead of your son's blood to stain the ground, mine will flow. Mercedes shrieked and sprang towards Monte Cristo, but suddenly stopping, Edmund, said she, there is a God above us, since you live, and since I have seen you again. I trust to him from my heart. While waiting his assistance, I trust to your word. You have said that my son should live, have you not? Yes, madam, he shall live, said Monte Cristo, surprised that without more emotion, Mercedes had accepted the heroic sacrifice he made for her. Mercedes extended her hand to the Count. Edmund, said she, and her eyes were wet with tears while looking at him to whom she spoke. How noble it is of you, how great the action you have just performed, how sublime to have taken pity on a poor woman who appealed to you with every chance against her. Alas, I am grown old with grief more than with years, and cannot now remind my Edmund by a smile or by a look of that Mercedes whom he once spent so many hours in contemplating. Believe me, Edmund, as I told you, I too have suffered much. I repeat, it is melancholy to pass one's life without having one joy to recall, without preserving a single hope. But that proves that all is not yet over. No, it is not finished. I feel by what remains in my heart. Oh, I repeat it, Edmund. What you have just done is beautiful. It is grand. It is sublime. Do you say so now, Mercedes? Then what would you say if you knew the extent of the sacrifice I make to you? Suppose that the Supreme Being, after having created the world and fertilized chaos, had paused in the work to spare an angel the tears that might one day flow for mortal sins from her immortal eyes. Suppose that when everything was in readiness, and the moment had come for God to look upon his work and see that it was good, suppose he had snuffed out the sun and tossed the world back into eternal night. Then, even then, Mercedes, you could not imagine what I lose in sacrificing my life at this moment. Mercedes looked at the Count in a way which expressed at the same time her astonishment, her admiration, and her gratitude. Monte Cristo pressed his forehead on his burning hands, as if his brain could no longer bear alone the weight of its thoughts. Edmund, said Mercedes, I have but one word more to say to you. The Count smiled bitterly. Edmund, continued she, you will see that if my face is pale, if my eyes are dull, if my beauty is gone, if Mercedes, in short, no longer resembles her former self in her features, you will see that her heart is still the same. Adieu, then, Edmund. I have nothing more to ask of heaven. I have seen you again, and have found you as noble and as great as formerly you were. Adieu, Edmund, adieu, and thank you. But the Count did not answer. Mercedes opened the door of the study and had disappeared before he had recovered from the painful and profound reverie into which his thwarted vengeance had plunged him. The clock of the Invalides struck 1 when the carriage which conveyed Madame de Morcerf rolled away on the pavement of the Champs-Élysées and made Monte Cristo raise his head. What a fool I was, said he, not to tear my heart out on the day when I resolved to avenge myself. End of chapter 89.
And cut. That's a wrap, folks. Thanks for listening to today's episode of I've Been Meaning to Read That, with me, your host, Dan. If you want to learn more about the show, you can follow us on Instagram at Meaning to Read and TikTok at I've Been Meaning. If you want to support the show to help keep it going, you can find me on Venmo at Dingus Donut, DINGUSDONUT. Supporters get a shout out on the show, and even more important, get to vote on the next book that we read. No matter what, I'll see you for our next episode. Until then, read those books you've been meaning to read, and have a lovely, lovely day.